Hello, friends. I hope you're doing very well. Today, we are going to be talking about why I don't recommend board and trains for anxious dogs, particularly highly anxious dogs. To give the disclaimer, yes, I am filming on two different cameras, so if you see me jump up and down, that's what's going on. But today, I want to talk about why I don't recommend board and trains for dog anxiety. And the operative word here is dog anxiety or highly anxious dogs. And that is to say that it's not that all board and train is always the devil. I don't generally recommend board and train. We don't do board and trains at all. So it's not necessarily my first choice for a lot of reasons, but that's not to say that board and train can never be effective. And there definitely are many ethical professional trainers who do board and train and are very successful. I just don't think that it's the right place for a highly anxious dog to start the recovery journey. Now, the last time that I shared this opinion, I had a lot of people slide into my DMs and tell me that they were unfollowing me and that I was the world's worst person. And so I am very aware that this is a arguable opinion, and I am very aware that it is a contentious topic, but I would like to sort of share it only because I think that it can be helpful for dog guardians of anxious dogs that might be considering board and trains at the moment. I would just like to offer my opinion to kind of give you some things to think about, okay? Now, this discussion was actually inspired by a friend of mine. So actually, she's my business coach, and she was telling me how she ended up sending her dog to a board and train to recover her dog's separation anxiety. And they did a 3-week program. It was $3,500, and it did absolutely nothing to treat the dog's separation anxiety. And the dog did come home learning sit and down and stay, and the dog does, work a little bit better on leash, but they sent her there for separation anxiety and it did absolutely nothing. And this was to no surprise of mine. And here's a couple of thoughts. The first is that, like in this case, many board and trains are very obedience heavy. And if you guys saw my Instagram post last week, I mentioned that, dog anxiety doesn't need obedience. Obedience and dog anxiety do not go hand in hand. That's like saying that, an anxious person needs to learn how to just sit still and that'll solve their anxiety. No, those two things are not correlated, right? If someone was telling you the way to get over your anxiety is just to sit still for 8 hours at a desk and do nothing, you would be certain that they are living in the 1962, as I say. So we want to be moving past this idea that board and train for anxiety is going to actually do more than just train obedience skills. That's number one. The other thing is that there are absolutely some sketchy board and train facilities, not all of them, but I have a client who was telling me that she took her dog to a board and train to help with her dog's anxiety, and it actually just made it worse because not only did she end up the dog ended up holding her bladder all the time because she was too scared to pee, and she wasn't drinking regularly, and it absolutely was more traumatic than anything else for this dog. And by the guardian's account, it actually made the dog's anxiety worse. So without a doubt, not all board and trains facilities are on the up and up, but also there are some. I don't want to say that they're all bad. That's not true. But even if you do have a board and train facility that is very ethical and is running very professionally and is treating the dogs well, even if that's the case, then by nature of training in the board and train, you are putting the dog in an unfamiliar environment. And when you put a dog in an unfamiliar environment, you're going to elicit irregular behavior. So the comparison that I always create for this is like, if you have your child go stay at a friend's house, the child usually behaves differently for their friend's parents. They're usually a little bit more behaved or a little bit more minding their manners at their parents or at their friend's house than they might for their own parents, right? Because an unfamiliar environment is going to elicit irregular behavior. Now, whether that irregular behavior is for the better or worse, that is that's flexible, and that depends on the case. But nevertheless, it's not what the dog is used to, right? And how the dog is usually going to behave. So the other thing is that dogs generally are not very good at generalizing. And that is especially true when you add in a high stress component like anxiety or fear or concern or panic or reactivity or separation anxiety, right? Those things are harder to generalize because there's more emotions involved. It's less of a logical experience, right? So all of those reasons, but if I can get to the crux of why I don't recommend board and train for anxious dogs, highly anxious dogs, if I can get to the crux of it, the real reason is because we want to transform the way guardians think about anxiety in dogs. If your dog is facing chronic anxiety or facing is frequently facing high stress, right? Then you need to accept that you have a more anxious dog by nature, and that anxiety is probably going to play somewhat of a role in your dog's life forever. That doesn't necessarily mean that your dog has to stay exactly as he is now. You can work through some of the things that are anxiety inducing. But if we think in terms of like a human that faces anxiety, a human faces anxiety for life. It's something that they learn to work through for life. They learn protocols and coping mechanisms to recover their anxiety, but it still stays with them for much of their life, if not the entire thing. And it's a battle, right? That has phases. Sometimes it's really good, sometimes it's really bad. And it's something that the person has to learn to live with. And that's how you need to be thinking about your dog's anxiety too. If you have a highly anxious dog, and this is particularly true if your dog experiences generalized anxiety. If that's the case, then you need to understand that you need to learn how to live with your dog who is a more sensitive character by nature. You need to understand that in the future, your dog may display anxious behaviors on a brand new thing that you weren't necessarily facing before, right? Or putting into a new house, like moving to a new house or a new state, or changing the family dynamics. Maybe someone moves in or someone moves out, right? All of those things can be catalysts for anxiety. And so when you think about a board and train, they're usually 3 to 4 weeks long. And we have this mentality that we just ship our dog off, and the dog trainer just goes in and tweaks a couple of things about the dog, fixes the dog, and sends it back to you, and all your prayers have been answered. But that's not how anxiety really functions in an individual, right? And it all stems down to this idea that we need to fix dogs, that the dog is broken and we need to, cure them. I'm not going to digress too much on that discussion because I've had Instagram posts regarding it, but your dog is not broken, and it's not a matter of you just shipping your dog off to the dog training mechanic and he's going to go in and do a couple of, mechanical tweaks to your dog and ship him back to you and say, I fixed him. You're welcome. Here you go. Right. And usually treating anxiety is a multi-month, if not multi-year process. It is not a matter of a 3 to 4 week thing. This is a 3 to 6 month plus journey in order to recover, to seriously make some ground in your dog's chronic anxiety. And if we're talking about separation anxiety, which usually are true separation anxiety kids, many of them come, paired with noise sensitivity or chronic stress, things like that. And so if we're talking about separation anxiety, why anyone would think that separation anxiety can be trained in a board and train is beyond me. Like the whole point of a board and train, the whole point of a separation anxiety is to get the dog to not be so attached to an individual. But taking that dog away from that individual for 3 to 4 weeks is not going to all of a sudden cure them of their hyper attachment to that individual, right? They have to learn how to be exposed to the individual and then exposed apart from them, and exposed to the individual and exposed apart from them. And there's a very methodical process of desensitization. That is not something that can be resolved in a board and train. So when we're talking about in terms of like chronic stress or generalized anxiety, that's usually something that often needs medication to support, right? To really help the dog out. But even if the dog is medicated, and even if the dog does go to a board and train, then you have to kind of think to yourself, what is the purpose of the board and train? Is the purpose just to get the ball rolling? Because if the purpose is to get the ball rolling, I would say that those 3 to 4 weeks is not really going to get the ball rolling very far, because you can maybe train the dog 20 minutes a day, maybe. If you're lucky, you can squeeze out 20 minutes of training out of the day. So so the dog's there for 3 to 4 weeks and only training about 20 minutes of those days. You're effectively paying for a glorified dog babysitter at that point. So how far can the ball really roll if that's the purpose, if you're only able to train about 20 minutes a day, if you're lucky? And that's assuming that the dog doesn't get trigger stacked. That's assuming all of those training sessions go swell. So I understand that we really love the idea of getting something that's 3 to 4 weeks long, and we just send our dog there and they rectify the situation and everything is magical. And the reason we're in love with that idea is because we like that it's faster. We like the idea that we can, we're all in a hurry. We want to get our lives back. We want to be able to take our dog places. We want to be able to go for that hike. We want to be able to go for a dinner out with just the family and not bring the dog, right? We are in a hurry to accomplish this goal. And that's why the board and train for 3 to 4 weeks is so appealing. But I propose that you are paying so much money for little to no reward. And in many cases, not always, in many cases, the dog is actually worse off going to that board and train than he was to begin with. So I know that the clients that usually come to work at Dog Liaison and that join the Recovering Rover program usually have tried some of their shorter method. They've usually tried like a 3 to 4 week program or our 12-week program for that matter. And then they go, oh, you know what? I'm realizing this is like actually a much more significant thing in my dog's life. This is not just like a 12-week fix. This is like a process. And that's why they join our 6-month program, right? I understand that not everybody watching this video is going to have already experienced that realization. I understand that not everybody having watched this video is going to have accepted that their dog is dealing with something very significant that's going to take a little bit longer than a 3 to 4 week board and train. But when you finally do get to that point, you're going to realize, oh, Jenna was correct. The board and train was not quite worth it. It was really appealing at the time, but it really wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth the money. It wasn't worth the stress that I put my dog under. I didn't really get what I was trying to accomplish, which was a less stressed dog, a more calm, comfortable, happy dog. Because that is something that has to be a process that is established through the dog and through the guardian together, right? Those two things build together. So tell me in the comments if this resonated with you. I know that it's arguable. I know that it's just my opinion, and you can make of that what you will, but I'd like to know what you hear, and I hope to see you guys soon.